David Bowie, Alan Rickman, Glenn Frey, Elise Regina, famous artists keep dying. What the hell, 2016? Okay, in the wake of a bunch of prominent celebrity deaths, I've been trying to put together some coherent thoughts about celebrity culture and what's going on with that. And I was reminded of a video that I watched where Jack Gleeson, who's the actor who portrayed King Joffrey in HBO's Game of Thrones series, was speaking to the Oxford Union about celebrity culture, and he said some really smart things. I'm gonna link to that whole video so you can go watch that thing if you want, but it's like half an hour, and so I just want to pull out one really cool thing that he said in that video. Jack Gleeson cites an idea from a guy named Jamie Tirani, who's a professor at Durham University in evolutionary psychology. The idea is called prestige. And the notion of prestige is that one of the evolutionarily adaptive traits of human culture is that we accord certain successful individuals in our society around us extra prestige, which means everyone who sees them wants to copy them to emulate what makes them successful in their life. This is an adaptive trait because it helps us as a species rapidly transmit behaviors which are successful in their environment to a whole group of people much faster than it would if we were waiting for those traits to be passed down genetically. So for example, if you have a really successful hunter in your tribe, and that hunter is regarded as prestigious so that the other members of the tribe all try and copy that hunter, then the other hunters will all become better by virtue of copying that one very successful hunter. The flaw in this trait is that it's very broadly generalized. We can't know in advance what behaviors are going to be successful in every specific circumstance and environment, and so prestige just means that that individual is worthy of emulation, generally speaking, and we might emulate the wrong traits when we emulate them. So if I'm admiring that really prestigious and successful hunter, and one of the things that makes them a successful hunter is that they have a superior technique for making arrowheads, and I watch them make the arrowhead, and I copy not only the technique that they're using to make the arrowhead, but then the hunter also has a ritual that they perform where they say magic incantations over the arrowheads, and I copy the ritual as well, because prestige doesn't tell me which of these traits is the one that makes them successful, so I copy the whole package. It's easy to see how if we apply this idea to the modern culture of obsession over celebrities, how this quickly leads us astray. Let's say you have a celebrity who's successful because they're a really good singer, performer, or dancer, and we admire them for their success, but we don't distinguish well between the traits that have made them successful and everything else that they've got going on in their lives. So we emulate everything about them, from their fashion sense, to their relationship choices, to their speech patterns, and anything else. It's also really important to point out that a cultural trait which might have been evolutionarily adaptive for us when, as a species, we were generally living in tribal, hunter-gatherer style societies, could be so evolutionarily maladaptive for us when we're living in these vast, connected, globalized societies with mass media, which makes it possible for a single individual to be prestigious over a far broader spectrum of humanity than ever in our history. Famous people now are more famous than ever. I think Jamie Tirani's idea of prestige is really helpful, but I don't think it quite gets to the dark underbelly of what's really going on in celebrity culture. For that, I think we need to borrow from René Girard's theory of mimetic desire and scapegoating. Girardian theory can basically be summed up like this: you don't want what you want what everyone else around you wants. Human desire is inherently mimetic. That is, we learn what we want by looking at and copying other people around us and their behaviors of desire and acquisition. This is easy to demonstrate. Imagine that you have two kids in a room full of toys. At first, the two kids might not, be that aware of each other. They might just sort of be playing, doing their own thing. But at some point, one of those kids notices there's a toy truck, moves over to pick up the toy truck, and the second kid sees that first kid going to play with the truck. Suddenly, the second kid doesn't want to play with any of the other toys in the room. Only that toy truck will do. And it doesn't even matter if there's an identical toy truck sitting right next to him, and you hand the identical truck to the second kid. It won't satisfy the second kid. The second kid really only wants the specific truck that the first kid set out to play with. We, all of us, learn patterns of desire and acquisition as small children by emulating other people, especially our parents, around us. We only know that something is desirable because someone else before us desired it. But the mimetic nature of desire has consequences. Those two children are now rivals for the ability to acquire and claim ownership over that truck that they're both competing for. And no parent anywhere would be surprised if that rivalry ends up breaking out into conflict and even violence. We can see this pattern replicated everywhere around us, from the smallest scale, how many of our stories, movies, and novels contain at their heart a love triangle where two individuals compete for the affections of a single romantic interest, to the largest scale, nations and tribes and countries going to war over limited resources and land. When I apply these Girardian ideas to the phenomenon of celebrity culture, what I see happening around us is an intensification, a sort of distilling down and focusing of this phenomenon of mimetic desire and the attendant rivalries. Basically, late-stage capitalism and its desire to commodify everything and to manufacture sufficient demand to drive this incredible engine of consumption has discovered in celebrity culture this incredible tool for being able to manipulate the demand of people, to manipulate the directions and energies of people through the mechanism of mimetic desire. Mimetic desire is why it's worthwhile for brands like Budweiser to pay an unknown vast sum of money to people like Peyton Manning to say in his post-game interview upon winning the Super Bowl that what he intends to do with his evening is drink large quantities of their beer. They're operating on the belief, and market research bears this out, that if Peyton wants to drink Budweiser, you will too. Individual celebrities may be celebrities because of some unique skill or talent or charisma, but celebrity culture as a whole doesn't exist because there are talented people. Celebrity culture as a whole exists because it is an incredibly useful tool for manipulating human behavior on a massive scale. I mean, nowadays we have celebrities who are celebrities not because of anything that they've accomplished or gained notoriety for, but just because they're famous. They're famous for being famous. They're tautologous celebrities. And if that isn't cynical enough for you, the darkest part of celebrity culture might not be that it exists basically as a tool to manipulate us, but that because how it functions is to intensify mimetic desire, and mimetic desire creates rivalry, which leads to competition and conflict and even violence, that celebrity culture actually fuels one of the worst human tendencies, which is the tendency to scapegoat. Scapegoating in Girardian theory is a technique that human cultures have come up with for stabilizing the overall effects that rivalry has by creating so much conflict and violence in a society. Essentially, how scapegoating works is that rivals in a society who desire to forestall the effects of that rivalry, which could lead to an outbreak of violence between them, find an adjacent, vulnerable target who they can blame for the discord which has arisen between them. Now, this adjacent target, the scapegoat, is actually innocent of the conflict that has arisen between the rivals, but the rivals both deny the innocence of the scapegoat, repress that, blame the scapegoat for it, and unite together to direct the violence which would have been between them at the scapegoat instead. Once the scapegoat has been suitably scourged or driven out or killed, a new peace is established between the rivals on the basis of the unity that they've achieved by uniting together in their aggression against the scapegoat. And the character of the scapegoat explains why in our celebrity culture the one thing we like even more than putting someone up on a pedestal and celebrating their every success is tearing them down and mocking them whenever they fail or whenever we dislike them. The Super Bowl every year in American culture is a veritable feast of all of these dynamics that I'm talking about. The consumptive, destructive powers of capitalism, the widespread use of mass media, the worship of celebrities, and not surprisingly, therefore, Super Bowls almost always include a scapegoat. After all, only one team, and by extension, one group of fans can win this tournament. Therefore, all that energy of millions of people simultaneously desiring the same thing and the rivalry that's gonna come along with it, that energy has to come out somewhere. And this year, it appears that the ordained scapegoat will be none other than the phenomenally talented quarterback of the Carolina Panthers, Cam Newton. Cam Newton, who was the MVP of the regular season and would have been the MVP of the Super Bowl had his team won it, and would have been on the cover of every magazine and news program and been lauded from here until kingdom come, is instead being excoriated by a bunch of people and called a bunch of terrible names because he abruptly left a press conference afterwards when he was sad or something about losing. The specific nature of the criticisms against Cam Newton are basically irrelevant. He's just a convenient target for people to vent their spleens and expiate all this built-up tension and violence that's inside them due to the rivalry and competition that's in our culture. But it is still very important for us to think about who gets scapegoated and why. Rene Girard points out that one of the most important characteristics of a scapegoat is that they have to be perceived as vulnerable by the person who's making the accusation against them to those kinds of accusations. In other words, they have to be someone who can't fight back in some way. For this reason, scapegoats are generally people who are vulnerable in their society: women, children, the elderly, the disabled, ethnic minorities, immigrants. So when you compare the situation situation of Cam Newton after this Super Bowl to another situation in 2010, which was very similar, when the Indianapolis Colts lost to the Saints, and Peyton Manning, who was then the quarterback of the Colts, left the field before the game clock had even expired and refused to shake hands with any of the other players, engaging in behavior which was objectively worse than anything that Cam Newton has done, and yet Peyton Manning is widely regarded as the very picture of integrity and good sportsmanship, while Cam Newton is, now being attacked for being a bad sport. You have to ask yourself, what is the difference between these two men that Cam Newton is perceived as being vulnerable to being scapegoated in this way, when Peyton Manning wasn't? These instances of scapegoating reveal the violence which ultimately underlies all of celebrity culture, because celebrity culture in its final sense is about the commodification of celebrities themselves, about turning their lives and their personalities and their personhood into an object for our consumption. And if they can be consumed, then they can also be excreted. We have turned them into something disposable, something which we would qualify and categorize as waste. And this brings me back full circle to the observation I began this video with. David Bowie and Alan Rickman and Glenn Frey and several other prominent artists recently died, and in the wake of their deaths there was this outpouring of grief from their fans on social media, this expression of profound loss for these people whom they never knew personally but connected with either through their art or through the mass media which has transformed them into a celebrity for their consumption. And it made me ask, what does this all mean? It feels important, it feels significant, these kinds of moments of grieving for our famous people. But why? Why would I think that, particularly since I'm so cynical about celebrity culture itself? What I believe is going on here is that the deaths of these people whom we have so commodified, so dehumanized, so transformed into symbols and objects for our consumption serves as a kind of disruption or rebellion against the process of commodification itself. Nothing says you don't own me like dying. The death of a celebrity, or of anyone really, brings us up hard and fast against this wall beyond which the mechanisms of desire and possession and rivalry have absolutely no power at all. When David Bowie died, as absurd as it sounds, without my permission, it forced me to confront his mortality, to grapple with his humanity, and hopefully with my own. Hey, this video was made for Cameron Highsmith, who was my 200th subscriber, and so I gave him the option of deciding what topic he would like to see me make a video on, and he picked celebrities and celebrity culture and the philosophy and theology of all of those things. So if this video was really long and really convoluted and you hated every minute of it, you can blame Cameron. Although I don't know why you're watching this like 5 million minutes into a video that you hated so much. So hopefully you really liked it and you're going to subscribe yourself, and maybe comment below about how recent deaths of celebrities or deaths of celebrities further in the past have impacted you personally. Thank you for watching.